In Economics 302 this semester, we're going to be studying macroeconomic models or theories. And there are different macro models that we're going to be studying. Let me give you the names of some of them. There's going to be the classical model. There's going to be the simple Keynesian model. There's going to be a short-run Keynesian model. There's going to be an ISLM model. There's going to be a new classical model. And there's going to be a monetarist model. Now, with respect to all of these different models, they all have the same objective, and that is to explain how the economy works. Right? So the objective of all these models is to explain the economy. And specifically, they're trying to explain certain variables. Why certain variables may change. Why, for example, the price level might go up in the economy. Or why real GDP might go down in the economy. Or why the interest rate might go up or down. Or why bond prices might go up or they might go down. All right, so they're trying to explain the economy, or in particular certain things that occur within the economy. All right. Now, there's a common theme to all of these models, and that is that they're trying to explain and predict. All right, trying to explain and predict. All right. For example, with respect to the price level P, they're trying to explain what determines the price level. Right? In other words, if the price level goes up, explain why it went up. If the price level went down, explain why it went down. Right? They're also trying to predict what might change that price level. For example, would a change in the money supply, let's say M, change in the money supply, lead to a change in the price level? Would a change in aggregate demand, YD, change the price level? So the objective of models is to try to explain and predict events in the economy. Right? Now, most of the models that we're going to use are going to be put in diagrammatic form. Right? So instead of talking about one of the macro models that we're going to be talking about this semester, let me give you an idea of the format that our models are going to fit in. And I'm going to use the supply and demand model that all of you are familiar with, all right, from your basic microeconomic principles course. In that course, you were introduced to the supply and demand model. And the reason this model was built is to try to explain a couple of variables, that is the price in a market and the quantity of output in a market. And we put price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. Now, when you're putting your variables on the axes, it is the variables on the axes that you're trying to explain. Right, so when we draw a model in class in Econ 302 and we put certain variables on the axes, it's these variables on the axes that we're trying to explain. So by looking at this picture of our supply and demand model in terms of its axes, you can tell that this model is trying to explain price and trying to explain quantity. Now, what goes within the axes is usually the model. And this model talks about demand, or refers to or looks at the behavior of buyers, and it also talks about supply, or looking at the behavior of sellers. Right? So this is a model that uses buyers and sellers, or supply and demand, to try to explain the variables P and Q. Right? So once again, the variables on the axes, like P and Q, are the variables that you're trying to explain. And what goes here in the center between these axes, this is the model, right? So this is the explanation for these variables that you see on the axes. Right. Now, one of the other things that you want to keep in mind this semester as we're looking at different models is that we'll be talking about variables that can change certain things. So let's again look at our supply and demand model. We've got this downward sloping demand curve and upward sloping supply curve. And occasionally in the course we're going to be putting variables after these curves. So we're going to say the demand curve is a function of or depends upon certain variables. Like it depends upon variable x and y and z. And the supply curve depends upon certain variables, let's say a and b and c. Right? What we put in parentheses here is what the curve or the supply depends upon. So that if there's a change in, let's say, A, there's going to be a change in supply. If there's a change in B, there's going to be a change in supply. If there's a change in C, change in supply. And the same thing with respect to demand. Change in X leads to a change in D, demand. Change in Y leads to a change in demand. Right? Now, occasionally we'll also do the following. After the parentheses, we'll do something like this. Let's say again, W, X, Y, and Z. Let's suppose those are the variables. Sometimes we'll put a plus or minus underneath the variables. Right? Now, if you're putting a plus sign underneath the variable, you're saying that there's a direct relationship between that variable and D. A direct relationship is a relationship where if W goes up, D is going to go up. Or if W goes down, D goes down. A minus sign, as you see here, speaks to an inverse relationship. And an inverse relationship says that the X variable and the D variable are related inversely such that if one goes up, X goes up, D goes down. Or if X goes down, D goes up. Alright, so let's just review the things that we're going to be talking about in Econ 302 when we're talking about models, right? Or theories, and again I'm using these words as synonyms, right? The objective of all models is to explain and predict. And you're trying to explain and predict something, right? And it's usually some economic variable, such as the price level or real GDP or the unemployment rate or the interest rate, etc. Now, with respect to those models or theories, we're going to usually put them in diagrammatical form, and whatever variables we put on the axes, for example, P, let's say, and real GDP, P price level, and Y real GDP, whatever we're putting on the axes, those are the variables that we're trying to explain. Right? Those are the variables that we're trying to explain. The model or the theory is contained between the axes. So we've got a demand curve here and a supply curve here. And that model looks at certain variables and shows how they're related. So D is a function of A, and we put a plus sign under A, which means if A goes up, D goes up. They are directly related. Over here in supply, let's suppose that it's a function of C, inverse relationship between C and supply. So that if C goes up, S goes down, or if C goes down, S goes up. Alright, and once again, we're going to be looking at different models. There's things at the classical model, New Keynesian, and we're going to be trying to explain how the economy works. Alright, how the economy works, or we're trying to explain certain variables in that economy.